told you, was there what were your thoughts on the purpose of the real estate commission? What were your thoughts on the purpose of the real estate commission? Feel free to open your mic and talk to me.
Hi, Michael. I think I saw it more as similar to the associations we've joined.
Okay, so almost like your realtor associations that you're talking about, right? Yeah. So no, the purpose of the real estate commission, as I stated, is to protect the public from dishonest and incompetent agents. That is very, very important to know, because they do not help in situations where you might be fighting for your commission or anything like that. That is not the purpose. Okay. So they have the authority. It says Georgia license law passed in 1925, and it has been changed and modified by the legislature many times since then. So as things come up, issues, challenges have occurred in the real estate industry. The Real Estate Commission, along with our state Senate and state House of Representatives, will create laws that protect the public. So the Real Estate Commission has the power to issue license and also set fees. So does anybody know, outside of your salesperson's license, what type of license does the Real Estate Commission issue?
The appraisal license.
Appraisers.
Appraisal license. Yep.
Broker.
Appraisal license, broker license, community association license. And then those fees that we have to pay for the renewal period or when we get licensed, the Real Estate Commission also sets those fees. So when you got your license and you had to pay that $170 application fee, that fee was set by the Real Estate Commission. Okay. Also, the commission has the power to pass rules and regulations and take disciplinary actions against agents. So this brings me to a point, okay? Because this class is on the topic of license law. And there are another set of rules and regulations that the Real Estate Commission implements that real estate practitioners are to abide by also. But the difference is Georgia House of Representatives and Senate, they create laws. Real Estate Commission create rules, okay? So the Real Estate Commission oftentimes create a rule that supports a law that has already been in place, right? And also the Real Estate Commission is the entity that investigates. So when agents do something incorrectly or they mistreat a client or something to that effect, and that client notifies the Real Estate Commission, the Real Estate Commission is the entity that investigates. And when they do that, the broker gets a call. And one of the things that I like to make sure that agents are aware of is that the Real Estate Commission says, okay, if the broker has given you guidance on how something should be handled, and we give you guidance based on the law or the rules and regulations, but a real estate agent deviates from that, then that real estate agent is the one that could potentially get themselves in trouble because the broker advised them on how to do things properly. So I always tell agents, anytime you're caught in a situation where you're unsure of what to do, I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you all check with your broker first. And then that way, if you check with the broker and you're advised to do something and it's not quite in line with real estate license law or the rules and regulations, then the broker is also in violation. Okay, so let's talk about the Real Estate Commission and how it is, what it looks like, the structure of the Real Estate Commission. Okay, there are 6 members of the Real Estate Commission, and all of them are appointed by the governor. So our current governor, Brian Kemp, appoints somebody to be on the Real Estate Commission for a term. Once the governor appoints that member to the Real Estate Commission, they are then confirmed by the state Senate. Okay, so that's how it works. Now, Those 6 members who are on the real estate commission, 5 of them must have been actively licensed for at least 5 years. Okay. 5 of them have to be actively licensed for at least 5 years. Okay. Also, 5 of the members must have been residents of the state of Georgia for at least 5 years. So out of the requirement, 5 members have to be actively licensed for 5 years. And then 5 of them have to have lived in the state of Georgia for at least 5 years. Remember, I told you there are 6 members of the real estate commission. 5 got to be licensed. One of those members of the real estate commission can have no ties to the real estate industry at all. So they're not a licensee, they're not an appraiser, they have no connection to the real estate industry. And my question to you is, why would the real estate commission be structured in a way where one of the members does not have a real estate license? What are your thoughts on that?
So that they could represent the public?
They can represent the public.
Exactly. Because remember, the reason the real estate commission is created was to protect the public. So one of the members of the real estate commission, what we would like to see is that we have somebody who's more in line and their thought process is from what the general public would believe or think. Okay. So those 6 members on the real estate commission, they serve 5-year staggered terms, right? So just about every year, the governor has to appoint a new member to the real estate commission that must be confirmed by the Senate. Okay. So 5-year staggered terms. Every year in January, there's a chairperson who is selected for the real estate commission. So every single year, in January, when they have their first meeting, the first order of business is to identify who the chairperson is. Okay. That is their job. Also, the real estate commission, again, they pass rules and regulations dealing with the conduct of licensees. So can anybody think of rules that we have to abide by that govern our conduct as licensees? What kind of rules do we have to follow? Y'all can feel free to talk to me this morning. As a licensee, what kind of rules do we have to follow?
Code of ethics? Code of
Fair
ethics?
housing.
Okay, so Charles said fair housing. Well, code of ethics isn't governed by the real estate commission. That's more our National Association of Realtors. But Charles is correct.
Fair housing.
That fair housing is a set of rules. Okay. Also, think about our advertising rules that govern how we're to display or advertise marketing properties and things of that nature. That is a rule. That is not a law. Okay. So we already talked about the 6 members of the real estate commission. Now let's talk about the real estate commissioner. Does anybody know who our current real estate commissioner is? Does anybody know? Shawana, you can't guess because I know you know.
Okay.
I know you know. Does anybody know who our current real estate commissioner is? No? Well, our real estate commissioner here in the state of Georgia is Mr. Lynn Dempsey. Okay, he is the real estate commissioner. Now, one thing that you need to be aware of is that the real estate commissioner is not a member of the real estate commission, the 6 members that I talked about earlier, because the real estate commissioner is quote unquote the CEO of the real estate commission. So they inform the real estate commission how to run the day-to-day operations. They oversee that. Okay, so Mr. Lynn Dempsey oversees how the real estate commission is ran. Okay. Also, the commissioner does not have a voting interest in decisions made by the commission. So we have those 6 members on the real estate commission that serve 5-year staggered terms, and a new commission member is appointed to the commission every single year. Okay. And then Mr. Lynn Dempsey, who is the quote unquote CEO of the Real Estate Commission, has no voting interest in the decisions that the group of 6 decide. Okay. Nor the commissioner nor any staff can hold an active license, active real estate license. So you'll see, like, if you go to the Real Estate Commission website, they are always advertising to hire investigators. And recently they've also been hiring someone to oversee the education department, right? Well, for those 2 positions, if anyone wants to be employed by the Real Estate Commission, you would have to make your license inactive. You cannot hold an active real estate license if you're going to be an employee of the Real Estate Commission. Okay. So with regards to the Real Estate Commission, what are some rules that they have? One of the things that all licensees need to be aware of is that the commission keeps a licensee's records going back 5 years. So violations, things that have been found or on your real estate license, like they did an investigation and they required you to take CE courses for some infraction, that's going to be kept by the Real Estate Commission for 5 years. Okay. Also, the Real Estate Commission issues licenses to brokers, broker associate, salesperson, and community association managers. So all of those licenses that have to do with real estate, from the community association license all the way up to the broker license, are issued by the Real Estate Commission. And since we're talking about brokers and broker associate, salesperson, all those sort of stuff, is anybody aware? Are there any brokers or associate brokers in here? Any brokers or associate brokers? No? Okay.
I have
Well,
a broker's license.
Okay, Charles has a broker's license. Well, one of the things, Charles, that I think you should be aware of is the Real Estate Commission this year has been talking about requiring all agents with a broker's license to complete specific broker CE classes, right? Starting in 2024. So the Real Estate Commission is getting ready to create a rule that requires whether you're an associate broker or a qualifying broker of a firm to take broker-specific continuing education, just like this course, the license law course that we're required to take every 4 years. Those broker courses will cover topics from trust accounts to agency and earnest money disputes. So more broker-specific CE is going to be required for anybody who holds that license. Okay. Also, the Georgia Real Estate Commission issues licenses to real estate businesses, real estate schools, and approved pre-licensed instructors. Okay. So not only do you have the license by the Real Estate Commission that are issued to practice real estate, but if you have a business that's going to be run, whether it be property management or traditional buy and selling, Real Estate Commission issues those licenses. If you want to be a approved pre-licensed instructor, or you want an approved real estate school, the Real Estate Commission will also issue those licenses. Okay.
A quick question.
Yes.
Regarding the requirements, the upcoming requirements for associate brokers in the CE, will there be a certain number of hours required?
That has not been decided yet. I'm pretty sure that's gonna more information about that is gonna come out in the third quarter of this year or the second half of next year, depending on when it's implemented. If they decide to implement it in 2024, it'll be the fourth quarter or the third quarter of this year. If they decide to implement it in 2025, it'll be the second half of next year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So what's required to be a broker? Okay. If you want to hold a broker's license here in the state of Georgia, it requires that you be at least 21 years old, a resident of Georgia, or you can qualify as a non-resident. And when they say qualify as a non-resident, they're specifically talking about people who hold the broker status in other states and get reciprocity. Or you also have people who hold a broker's license in the state of Georgia, but no longer live here. Okay. In order to become a broker, one must have a high school diploma or equivalent. So what would be equivalent to a high school diploma? Anybody tell me?
The
GED.
GED.
Yes, ma'am. So you have some people who go through the GED program because their ultimate goal is to get licensed, and that's perfectly fine. Also, you have to be actively licensed for 3 of the past 5 years. Okay, so you can get licensed at the age of 18, which we know you have to be 18 to get a real estate license. If you are actively licensed for the first 3 years, once you turn 21, if you meet all the other requirements, you can get your broker's license. Okay. Or if you got your license when you were 18 and you were active for the first year, inactive the second year, and the third and fourth year you were active, then you can go get your real estate license also at that point. Okay. So you have to be actively licensed for at least 3 of the past 5 years. And then, in addition to the previous qualifications, you also have to complete a 60-hour approved education pre-license course. Okay, so much like your salesperson pre-license course, the broker course requires a pre-license course also. Okay, and lastly but not least, this is the most important thing, right? In order to become a broker, you must be of good moral character and then pass the state exam. So how does the Real Estate Commission, who issues broker's license, determine if someone is of good moral character?
Background check.
There you go. Background check. That is how they do it. They have a background check. Okay. Also, every single real estate company must have a qualifying broker. How many qualifying brokers can one company have? Does anybody know? How many qualifying brokers can one company have?
One.
There you go, just one. And for EXP, the qualifying broker is me, Michael Brock. So we have a staff of 5 brokers, but as far as the Real Estate Commission is concerned, if anything happens, Michael Brock is the qualifying broker who's responsible for the actions of the agents. Okay. Also, there's another status. We talked about qualifying broker, which each company can have 1 qualifying broker. But then there's also a status called an associate broker. And the associate broker is someone who's met the same licensing requirements as a qualifying broker, but has chosen to be an agent of another broker. So in this situation, many people at EXP have a broker's license. However, as we just stated, I'm the only qualifying broker. The other brokers who have the broker status are associate brokers with EXP. Okay. And then the second classification is the salesperson license. Okay. And a salesperson can only work as an agent of a licensed broker. So that means if you're going to be actively licensed as a salesperson conducting business, you can only do it on behalf of 1 broker. Okay. And the qualifications to be a salesperson is you got to be at least 18 years of age, be a resident of Georgia, or qualify as a non-resident. Third, you have to have a high school diploma or equivalent. We've already established that a GED would satisfy that. And then there is a 75-hour approved education course. Okay. And then also, salespersons must be of good moral character and also pass the state exam. Okay. So that's one thing when we go into business with our real estate agents, we know they're all great people. How do we know that? How do we know they're great people? Because they have a Georgia real estate license and the Real Estate Commission has done a background check to verify that. Okay. When I taught pre-license courses, this was one of the most important things. I'm sorry, somebody's
Georgia contract
microphone
class
is
this
speaking.
morning.
Is speaking.
Period.
Could you mute your mic,
So
please?
you will see Caroline were prepared to show you how to get listings and with
Hello?
another
Hello, hello.
surprise.
Someone's speaking. Someone's microphone is on. Okay, thank you. One of the most important things that I would tell people during my pre-license class for those new agents is that you must, as a new licensee, complete a 25-hour post-license course within the first year of getting licensed. Otherwise, your license will lapse. Okay? If you do not complete the 25-hour post-license course within the first year of getting licensed, it will cause your real estate license to lapse. Okay? So there's a little caveat to that, right? If you're enrolled and paid for the course but failed to complete it for any reason, the Real Estate Commission will allow you a grace period of 6 months to complete it. Okay? They'll allow you a grace period of 6 months to complete it if you have paid for the course but have not completed it yet. And if you need to reinstate your license, if you have not reinstated your license within 6 months, the things that you have to do is 1, complete the post-license course, pay any penalties and fees, and then you must also retake the state exam. Okay? In order to reinstate your license, if you have allowed your license to lapse for not completing the post-license course, and it's not within the first 6 months, first you have to complete the post-license course. You have to pay your penalties and fees, but then retake the state exam. And I promise you, I'm not a big fan of taking tests, but that is no fun to go through that again. Okay? Also, the Real Estate Commission issues Community Association Management License. They're oftentimes referred to as CAMS license. And this license is limited to tasks involved in managing homeowners associations. So those homeowners associations that none of us like, right? With a Community Association Management License, you can manage a homeowners association. Now, one thing to be sure or aware of as someone who holds a CAM license is that someone who holds that CAM license cannot facilitate sales transactions, okay? And just like a salesperson, someone who holds a CAM license must also work as an agent for a broker. So if you know of an entity that manages homeowners associations, the person who has a CAM license, just like a salesperson, works under a broker. Okay. Also, they are not licensed to list or sell real estate. I mentioned that already. And what is the process for them? Well, here in the state of Georgia, to acquire a CAM license, just like a salesperson, you have to be 18 years old, be a resident of Georgia unless you're qualifying as a non-resident. You must also have that high school diploma or GED, which is equivalent, and complete a 25-hour approved pre-license course. So just like salespeople and brokers have to go through a pre-license course, so do community association managers, and their pre-license course is 25 hours. Okay, and just like salespersons and brokers, they must be of good moral character, determined by the background check and pass the state exam. Now, with regards to continuing education, who can tell me how many CE hours are required every 4 years? How many CE hours are we required to take every 4 years?
36.
36.
That's right, that's right. 36 hours. So you can see here that rule was changed, I feel like in 2015, because previously it was 24 hours, but that was required every 4 years. But now that rule has increased to 36 hours. And the note here breaks it down into 4 years. If you just want to do it, be consistent, it requires 9 hours of CE per year. Okay. Now, this is an interesting fact that I learned by the Real Estate Commission, that licensees actively licensed on or before January 1st, 1980 are exempt from continuing education requirements. So if you know someone who was licensed since 1978 and has been actively licensed since then, they are not required to complete the continuing education hours like all licensees since then. Okay.
One question is, are the requirements for the education hours different in every state? Because I'm licensed in South Carolina as well, and I think it's less than what you just said.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. So this one thing that is consistent or consistently inconsistent across the country is real estate is governed by each state's entity. So South Carolina may have a different number of continuing education hours required. Florida, North Carolina, Texas, every state probably has a different number that's required. So yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Also, someone who is not a resident of Georgia and is not licensed in their home state must meet the same requirements as a Georgia resident. Simply meaning, if someone who doesn't live in the state of Georgia wants to have a real estate license in the state of Georgia, they have to go through the same process that someone who lives here would have to go through. Meaning, they have to have the high school diploma or equivalent, pass the background check, complete the 75-hour pre-license course, if they are not licensed in their home state. Okay. Now, if you are an out-of-state licensee that holds a Georgia real estate license, in order to conduct real estate business, you have to affiliate your Georgia license with a Georgia brokerage. Okay. So let's say, for example, you lived in Kansas, but you have a Georgia license and you know someone who wants to purchase or sell a home here in Georgia. In order to handle that transaction, you would have to activate your Georgia license with a Georgia real estate company. Okay. Now, to obtain a non-resident Georgia license, so someone who doesn't live in Georgia, what do they have to do if they are licensed, right? First, they got to show proof of current licensure and clean disciplinary record in their home state. So if I'm licensed in Texas and I would like to get reciprocity in Georgia, part of the application requirement is going to require the licensee in Texas to prove their current license status in their home state, which is Texas in this case, and then also prove that they have had no disciplinary actions from the real estate governing body in that state. Okay. Also, they have to pay any required fees. Okay. Then also they have to sign a statement that he or she has read the Georgia license law, rules, and regulations. That is just a high bar, isn't it? They're not even acknowledging the fact that they understand Georgia real estate license law. They just have to simply sign a document saying that they have read it. Okay. Then also they have to affiliate with the Georgia broker and provide documentation as requested. So the Real Estate Commission may ask for additional information other than those standard documents. And if you want that Georgia real estate license, they would have to provide those documents to the Real Estate Commission. Okay. So if you're licensed in another state, you would have to give permission for the Real Estate Commission to accept service on behalf of the applicant in any legal matter. Now, why is that important? Well, because we talked about early on, once you're issued a license, one of the things that you have to do is show that you're a person of good standard. So the Real Estate Commission says, all right, if we've done a background check, we know they're of good standing at the time we issued the license. However, if we want to make sure that the people who are real estate licensees continue to be great, of good moral character, anytime someone from out of state receives a legal notice to appear in court for any legal matter, the Real Estate Commission wants to get a copy of that, okay? The reason they want to do that is because the Real Estate Commission hopes to prevent people who may commit fraud or things of that nature from ever getting licensed, okay? The Real Estate Commission says if there are certain things, if you do commit fraud, we will never issue you a license, remember? Because their job is to protect the public from dishonest and incompetent agents, okay? Also, they would have to sign an agreement to assist the commission in any investigation. Has anybody ever been involved in an investigation involving the Real Estate Commission? Anybody? And if you have, how did that go? Yeah, how did that go? Sounds like you've experienced that. No? Okay. Well, they are very, very thorough. And the Real Estate Commission oftentimes will have spin-off cases off of one case. So let's say, for example, someone of the public feels like they weren't represented properly in a real estate transaction and they notify the Real Estate Commission. Well, once the Real Estate Commission investigates, if they find out from the documentation that something else has occurred in the transaction as a result of another agent's actions or the broker's actions even, not only will they investigate the original complaint, but they would also investigate the other agent or the broker that was involved, okay? So the Real Estate Commission has reciprocity agreement with many other states that enable licensees who are moving from state to state to get another license in their new home state, which could potentially be Georgia, okay? Matter of fact, Georgia is one of the easier states to get reciprocity with because we have reciprocity agreements with most of the states here in the United States that make it really, really easy for people to get licensed here in Georgia if they're licensed somewhere else. Does anybody know why the Real Estate Commission here in Georgia makes it easy for people to get reciprocity? Feel free to take a guess. Why would the Real Estate Commission make it easy for people to get their license, their reciprocity license? Hello?
More business?
Okay, somebody says more business. Not quite.
We're a
Not
transient
quite.
state.
I'm sorry?
We're a transient state. A lot of people move here.
That's true. That's true, but a little bit more detail. Okay, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this way. Georgia is very unique in the sense that what type of people oftentimes move here?
Military.
Let me ask you. Military. So Georgia has a lot of thriving military bases. You got Fort Benning, Fort Stewart, Dobbins Air Force bases. There are so many just across the state of Georgia. So for the military and the military's families who are oftentimes moving in and out of states as they're, as they're assigned, Georgia made it really, really easy for people who might already have a real estate license to get licensed here in Georgia. Okay. So an out-of-state agent may work with a prospect in Georgia under an affiliation agreement with a Georgia broker, right? So there's this city, let me paint the picture here for this situation, right? There is a city just across the Georgia-Alabama line called Phoenix City, Alabama. right? Which is near Columbus. And agents in the Columbus area may oftentimes have a buyer who's interested in buying in the area. And every now and then they may have to go show a property that might be right across the state line in Alabama. Well, Georgia has a rule or license law that says, okay, let's say it's the other way around. An Alabama agent who lives in Phoenix City who wants to show a Columbus property, right? Well, they can sign an affiliation agreement with the Georgia broker just for that transaction that would allow them to facilitate the transaction for their buyer client. Okay. That's what that agreement is for. Okay. Now, this affiliation agreement that it must be signed in this case has to be signed for each transaction that the out-of-state licensee crosses into the state of Georgia. So if an agent who lives in Phoenix City, Alabama, signs one affiliation agreement with a Georgia broker to help a client for AB 123 Main Street, they have another client that wants another property, a separate affiliation agreement would be required to be signed. Okay. That affiliation agreement must disclose how the commission is going to be divided. The listing or management agreements must be in the name of the Georgia broker because that transaction is happening in the state of Georgia. Also, negotiations require express permission of the Georgia broker. Okay. If you ever notice in your exclusive buyer brokerage agreement and your exclusive seller listing agreement, there's a box that requires the agent and the client to check whether or not the Georgia agent has the ability to negotiate on their behalf, right? So in this same situation, if that out-of-state licensee is going to negotiate on behalf of the client, they have to express that, okay? And again, advertising must be in the name of the Georgia broker, okay? Advertising must be in the name of the Georgia broker. In that affiliation agreement, also, the contract must identify the Georgia broker and the out-of-state broker as not licensed in Georgia. Okay, so that licensee signs the affiliation agreement with a Georgia broker. That affiliation agreement must identify who the out-of-state broker is for the licensee and disclose that they are not licensed in the state of Georgia. Okay. Trust funds, my favorite section. Okay, trust funds must be held by a Georgia broker unless all parties agree otherwise in writing. So this is the same principle that requires the F510 and F511 to be signed in the event that the closing attorney is holding the earnest money or trust fund. Same situation here. A Georgia broker can hold it without signing any additional documents. But in the event someone else outside of a Georgia broker is holding any trust funds, it must be disclosed in writing. Okay. So now let's talk about company licenses. And in order for a firm to receive a broker's license, an individual who has a broker's license must be named as the qualifying broker. Now, let me ask you this. Does this mean that a licensee cannot own a real estate company? Yes or no? Does this mean a
Could you repeat that
licensee?
question? Michael, could you repeat that question?
Yes. This statement says an individual who's a broker's license must be named as the qualifying broker, right? So my question is, does that mean a salesperson can or cannot own a real estate company? Can a salesperson?
They can.
They can.
They can. But if they do, they have to hire a what?
Qualifying broker.
There you go. Okay. They have to hire a qualifying broker. Okay. Again, the qualifying broker is responsible for all licensees and all business of the firm. Okay. So let me paint this picture a little bit more detailed here, right? Sometimes there are people who may own rental property. And they're like, hey, this real rental property, I'm not listing it with the Georgia broker, so I can discriminate against a protected class if I want to. Well, no, you cannot do that. Because once you're licensed, and you're held to that higher standard all the time. So if someone who is a salesperson markets their own rental property and discriminates against a protected class, who could ultimately be responsible for that?
The broker.
Qualifying broker.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, let me tell you this. I know a lot of people are like, "Ooh, let me, since it's not that big of a deal to me, let me do it." And then the broker gets in trouble. Well, this is the part that it works in this is the part where it works in the broker's favor. If the broker has educated the licensees on how things should be done, and the agent deviates from those instructions, then the broker is not responsible for the actions of the licensee. Okay? They're not responsible in that case. Also, the qualifying broker must have the authority to bind the firm in any matter which comes before the commission. Okay, so sign off on the acceptance of punishment for some action of the licensee. That's something that the broker has to have the authority to do. So here's a copy of the Georgia Real Estate Commission seal. Notice in the center of that seal, it is the Georgia State seal, and then on the exterior, it just says the Georgia Real Estate Commission. And this is important because this is on every single salesperson's license and broker's license.
Are you sharing?
In
something,
addition,
Michael? I'm sorry. Are you sharing something?
Yeah,
can you walk?
we're not
Yeah.
seeing anything.
And then okay. Well, remember the PowerPoints will be shared with you afterwards, after the class. Yeah. So the Real Estate Commission is around the exterior of the seal, and the broker must keep all of the licensees' license in custody. So which simply means that the broker or brokerage has to have every single affiliated licensee's license on file. Now, before the computer and before the internet and things of that nature, they actually would have a book of all the agents' licensee license. Now there is the Georgia Real Estate Commission back office, where all the licensees affiliated with a particular brokerage can be accessed that way. So you don't necessarily have to have a physical copy anymore. Okay. Now, earlier when we were talking about the Real Estate Commission, we mentioned that they are the ones who establish the fees, okay, and the issuance of license, but also the renewals. And they determine how often license should be renewed. So right now, how often does your real estate license have to be renewed?
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years. So the Real Estate Commission are the ones who implement that rule. A license lapse if the renewal fee has not been paid. So in addition to the education requirements, there is also a fee that must be paid in order to renew your real estate license every 4 years. And if you fail to pay that renewal fee when your license come up for renewal, your license will automatically go inactive. Automatically, okay? So, but the lapsed license can be reinstated anytime within 2 years by paying all the fees due, plus the late charges and reinstatement fee. Now, this is only if your license has lapsed because of non-payment of a fee. Okay, so if you have failed to pay your fee, within 2 years, you can reactivate your license by paying the fee and the late charges. Okay. Also, if the lapse is for more than 2 years, but less than 5, it can still be reinstated by paying all of the fees and completing any educational or CE requirements that were made by the commission. So if you haven't kept up with your continuing education requirements and your license has lapsed for 2 years, more than 2 years, but less than 5, you have to complete the education requirements and pay the fees and fines for allowing your license to lapse. However, if you allow your license to lapse for more than 5 years, it can only be reinstated by meeting the same requirements as a new licensee, which means you got to take the pre-license course over again, pass the class exam, pass the state exam, and submit your application and background check to the Real Estate Commission. Okay. Also, the Real Estate Commission is responsible for renewing real estate schools and real estate instructors. Okay, they also must renew their license periodically. Okay. So there are several reasons that the Real Estate Commission may fine an agent, right? So let's talk about some of these reasons. If you fail to notify the Real Estate Commission of a change of address or change of employment or opening or closing a trust account within 30 days, you've got to notify them in writing. Now, when they say a change of employment, that doesn't mean that you went from working at Bank of America to Chase, or that you went from working from T-Mobile to Verizon. They're only talking about the real estate company that you have moved from, okay? So if you make a change from one company to another, you have to notify the Real Estate Commission within 30 days. Now, a lot of you are wondering, hey, I've changed companies before and I didn't have to notify the commission yourself. Because oftentimes what happens is the broker, once they pick up your license, that is a way of notifying the Real Estate Commission that you have changed employment. Okay. Also, failing after leaving a broker to join a new broker or go active within 30 days. Okay. Also, there's a fee or a fine for failing to respond when asked for additional information on an application. Let's say the Real Estate Commission receives your application to be licensed. However, if they ask you for additional information, they may charge you a fee if you don't respond in a timely manner. Okay? They may charge you a fee if you don't respond in a timely manner. Or if you pay with a check that bounces. You pay with a check, that check bounces, the Real Estate Commission is going to charge you an additional fee. Now, it's important to know that the Real Estate Commission is not supported by taxpayers. So if they're not supported by taxpayers, how are they funded? Any ideas on how the Real Estate Commission is funded?
Our fees that we pay?
There you go. Those renewal fees that we pay, those application fees that we pay, that is how the Real Estate Commission is funded. It is not funded by taxpayers, okay? So those fees are deposited into the state treasury and the expense paid from funds received. The expenses are paid from the funds received. So the salaries of the employees of the Real Estate Commission are paid out of the funds that the Real Estate Commission collects. Okay. Now, anyone who does not wish to conduct real estate business may, one, return their license to the commission and go inactive. So if you know, hey, you know, I've done great, or maybe this business isn't great for me as you thought it would be, I would suggest, instead of completely surrendering your license to the Real Estate Commission, that you simply go inactive. And if you go inactive, keep up with your continuing education hours, because in that case, if you're inactive for more than 2 years and less than 5, all you got to do is pay the fine, pay the fee, right? That's what I would recommend. Because if you ever surrender your license, the only way to get a real estate license again is to go through the entire process all over. Okay. Also, it's important to know there's no time limit for how long a license can stay inactive. So if you decide, hey, I'm not doing great right now, I'm going to go inactive, you can do that. One, I highly again recommend that you keep up with your continuing education hours. That way, in the event that you decide to ever get your license back active, all you got to do is pay the fee and the fine. Okay. And your renewal fees must be paid every 4 years. We mentioned that. An inactive licensee may not conduct any real estate business. Okay, this is important. This is why it's so important for our agents to be aware of the status of their license. Because if your license is inactive and you conduct real estate business, that is a violation of license law. And the Real Estate Commission can fine you or penalize you based on you continuing to practice without an active license. Okay. Also, restoring the license to active status will require the completion of any education, which would have been required while the license was inactive. So if you allow your license to be inactive for 2 years, then that means you've got to complete the continuing education that you would have had to complete during that time frame in order to get your license back active. Okay. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, making your license inactive versus surrendering your license are two very different things. Because making a license inactive, not the same. Because if you surrender your license again, the only way to get your license back if surrendered is to go through the entire process again. Pre-license course, background check, submitting your application, passing the state exam. All of these things would be required in order to reactivate a license that has been surrendered. Okay. So those are your voluntary ways of making a license inactive or surrendered. The Real Estate Commission also has the power to issue, censure, revoke, or even suspend a license. Okay. They can even refuse to issue a real estate license based on certain things. Maybe your background check doesn't look good, so the Real Estate Commission won't issue you a license. They have the ability to do that. Okay. The aim of the commission is to prevent anyone who has been convicted of a felony or any crime involving dishonesty from getting or holding a license. So let me ask you this. If someone has been found guilty of fraud, do you think they will ever get a real estate license?
No.
No.
No. They will, chances are they will probably never get a real estate license because remember, the Real Estate Commission's ultimate goal is to protect the public from dishonest and incompetent agents. If you have been found guilty of fraud, you've already proven yourself to be dishonest. So they're not going to put themselves in a situation where you can continue to do it and negatively affect the public in a real estate transaction. Okay. So what are the reasons a license may be denied? So a corporation, LLC, or partnership with ownership share of more than 20% by a person who has been convicted of a felony. Now, I would like to say this, not all felonies are created the same. And it's interesting, this situation, right? Because I've seen situations where somebody who has been found guilty of a violent crime has been able to receive a real estate license. Now, why is that? Because their crime didn't involve misleading or negatively affecting the public in a fraudulent way. Okay. Also, an applicant with a single felony conviction is not eligible until at least 2 years have passed since satisfactory completion of any sentence. So if you've got a felony conviction of something and you want to be a real estate licensee, you have to wait 2 years after the completion of your sentence before you can be receive a real estate license. Okay. However, an applicant with multiple felony convictions is not eligible until at least 5 years have passed. Okay. So if you have multiple felony convictions in one single case, in order to get your real estate license, you have to wait 5 years after completion of the sentence. Okay. An applicant for an associate broker or broker's license with a felony conviction, they have to wait